Nerada awoke in a panic, her gown drenched in sweat from the mental and physical ordeal of the dream. She was a dreamweaver, and so for her, the dreamscape was far from a sedate ethereal realm of escapism and memory. It was a battering test of endurance, as she attempted to comprehend the plotting and rambling musings of the alien minds of the giants. She sat up with a start from her sleeping mat, her attendant shocked by her sudden awakening. She was expecting Nerada to remain in her drug-induced trance for several more hours. Nerada immediately held her hand to her face, rubbing her temples and eyes as the lingering effects off the roots and leaves she had imbibed caused her head to ache. Of course, communing with the incomparable minds of the giants didn't help either, but she had no time for self-indulgence. Turning to her attendant, a young woman with a startled expression on her face. "We have to go," Nerada declared with a panicked tone, her attendant seemingly confused by her statement. "Now," the Dreamweaver declared. "The caravan must flee or we must all die." The attendant nodded with a small head bow before turning to run from the yurt, leaving the flap to whip back and forth in the wind. Nerada, feeling the sudden coolness of the air against her glistening skin, roused herself to her feet. Even before she had taken a step, the deep bellow of a thunderous horn blared from the outside. She stood up straight, patted down her gown, and left the yurt. As she stepped beyond the threshold, a flash of lightning arced across the sky, startling Nerada. She hadn't known there was a storm. That would complicate the escape, she thought. She stood there for a moment and watched the flurry of activity spread through the encampment like a wave. News was spreading and each yurt was showing signs of activity. "How long do we have?" a deep voice declared, a figure approaching from Nerada's left. Out of the task strode a tall man in the lead of a small group. The man's skin was tanned and weathered, his green eyes catching the flickering illumination of a nearby brazier. "An hour, Chieftain Moran," Nerada responded. "Maybe less." "Are you sure?" the chieftain inquired. Nerada could tell that he was not questioning her insights. An emergency decampment was not something done lightly, and it had its own risks. He needed reassurance. Nerada looked at the chieftain sternly, her face a picture of steadfast resolve. "Positive. A giant is coming from the north. We need to leave within the hour and head west or we will be crushed beneath its weight." Without further inquiry, the chieftain nodded and turned. The following hour was a fearful and anxious logistical calamity as hundreds of families frantically disassembled their carefully raised yurts and teepees and haphazardly gathered their belongings. The endeavor was unhelpfully hindered by dreadful weather as the impending storm finally broke and rain drenched the ground. Some of the families were slow in their response, allowing a myriad of insignificant matters to sideline them from the task of survival. Yet, as the quaking began, those previously laggard tribesmen soon redoubled their efforts. The giant was coming. In just under an hour, the chieftain and his cadre of young men had harried the tribesmen into a whirlwind of activity, and the beasts of burden were loaded with all the worldly possessions of the tribe. And it was then that the visage of the giant, silhouetted against the dark clouded sky by occasional lightning strikes, appeared beyond the mountains to the north. The creature was gargantuan in scale, incomprehensibly tall, standing over 3 miles high on countless giant legs of stone and rock, supporting a vast disc-like body adorned with landscapes of fields, mountains, forest, and valley tens of miles across. Even for Nerada, who had known the giants intimately for almost her whole life, seeing a walking landmass felt reality itself was breaking. Yet it was all very real, as was the danger. And they were running out of time. "We must go. Now," Nerada called out to the chieftain as he ran to collect her, the tribe's Dreamweaver. The older man was panting, exerting himself well beyond his years. Nerada liked Moran, trusted him, and she knew he trusted her. They both cared for little in this world, certainly not themselves. All that matters to them both was the tribe. He grabbed her by the waist with one hand and took her arm with another. Nerada allowed the man to handle her, and after approaching one of the beasts, he lifted her lithe form effortlessly atop the creature. "Now go. Lead them to safety. I will follow," Moran declared, but before he went to turn away, Nerada reached down and grabbed his arm. "No. You go now too. All of us need to go now, or none of us will survive." Moran looked up at Nerada, hesitant to lead from the front as he had spent a lifetime always being the last man from camp, the last man in the caravan, watching over all. But there was something in the young woman's words and the grasping desperation of her touch. So he nodded and pulled himself atop the beast behind her and immediately kicked the animal forward. The caravan fled with great haste. Hundreds of beasts carrying over 1,000 tribesmen launched into a brisk gallop straight into the darkness of the stormy night. The tribe's guides led the way down well-studied paths, yet the dangers of the trek were real, and several animals, along with their passengers and cargo, slipped and fell in the inclement weather. Nerada heard the cries of the people, her tribesmen, as they called out to their brethren to stop and save them, but none stopped. They couldn't. For as they fled west, the all-imposing presence of the giant, having now crossed the mountain range, was upon them. The dark, storm-filled night seemed to grow even blacker as the heavens themselves were replaced by the giant's enveloping form. The scale of the monstrosity was so incomprehensible in its grandeur that Nerada could not judge if they were far enough away. The herd of beasts traveled more than 30 minutes at breakneck speed before the giant finally came to a pause, and with that, began to lower itself to the ground. Nerada could see the rock, stone, and dirty covered underbelly above her, and for several minutes, she was sure they were still beneath this approaching form. Yet, as they cleared one of the giant legs, the sound of exuberant hollering could be heard from within the tribe as the realization that they had cleared the edge of the giant's body dawned upon them. Yet, they did not let up, the caravan maintaining a rapid pace. For as deadly as it was to find yourself beneath a resting giant, it was almost as dangerous to be in its vicinity. The ground began to shake violently as the giant made landfall, the beast of the caravan forced to slow from the unsteady footing. The very landscape of the area began to morph as whole mountains were pushed aside, rivers diverted, and the terrain utterly transformed by the giant's presence. The gush of wind suddenly battered the caravan like a thunderclap as the last of the air beneath the settling giant was pushed out. Dust and debris filled the sky, whipped into an aerial frenzy by the wind and the storm. The tribe did not stop for another hour, by which time the beasts were ragged and bordering on lame. It was an exhausting ride, a desperate flight of survival only made possible by her insight. Moran had been sitting behind her the whole time, his arm wrapped firmly around his waist, keeping her, their Dreamweaver, safe. "You saved us," he whispered to her, pride filling his voice. Nerada smiled. She had saved them, rescued them from certain demise. They would live on for another day, survive in a world ruled by giants.